Today I want to share with you exactly how I teach a first lesson with a new student after 5 years of hopefully getting it down to a fine art. It's actually quite simple and I think it can easily be adapted to work with a full class if you divide the students into pairs and use your imagination just a little. It's not a typical TEFL lesson plan. It's more designed to help put you and your student at ease by focusing on their hobbies, their interests and their passions, so that you can use these as conversation tools to find new vocabulary relevant to them from that lesson and going into the future. Ahoy from Prague. I'm Paul Colto, this is Yojin, and I know how nerve-wracking a first lesson with a new student can be. But after 5 years practice, I think I've honed quite a nice, informal and friendly technique that will hopefully put both you and your student at ease. So I hope the technique that I'm about to share will give you a very pleasant first lesson, but also maybe help you feel that wonderful feeling we sometimes get when we meet a new person for the first time. So to start, just a little disclaimer that this first lesson plan is primarily focused on teaching adults in a one-to-one situation, but I think it can work with older teenagers and in a group class. So first of all, it should go without saying that first impressions count. So for goodness sake, be smart and be on time. And when your student arrives, smile, make eye contact and explain slowly and clearly that this first lesson will just be about getting to know each other, and that at the end of the lesson you'll be giving them some lesson materials for future lessons. I think another nice thing to bear in mind is that although there is a teacher-student dynamic at play in a lesson, I think it's nice to think of it also, especially in the first lesson, as like a host and a guest dynamic. So imagine that your student has come to your house and you want to treat them with that respect and that interest. You really want to get to know this person so that you can help them and find out exactly what it is that they want to practice and learn about the most. So I will have my tablet on the desk in front of me with just a blank document there. It works perfectly as well just to have a notepad with a pen. And through the lesson, every time your student mispronounces a word or doesn't know one particular word and you find it together after they've explained it, make a note. So hopefully by the end of the lesson you've got between 15 and 20 just little corrections regarding pronunciation and vocabulary that you can test them on at the end of the lesson, just to show that they have picked up some vocabulary in that first lesson. So I've put my student at ease. I've got a document open in front of me, and then I explain that I'm going to introduce myself, and that after that I want them to introduce themselves. I'll say my name, I'll say where I'm from, I'll say a little bit about my family, I'll describe my hometown and the school I went to and the university I went to, and then the jobs I had between the end of university and leaving the UK. And at the end of that, I'll talk about my hobbies, my passions and my interests. And this is the thing I will really try to sort of show that is the thing I want them to talk about most when it's their turn. So I'll say, I love songwriting and recording music at home and making albums, and I love cooking. I cook pretty much every night and I cook breakfast every day. And I love going to the countryside and exploring the Czech Republic. And I love Prague, and I love exploring Prague, getting to know new cafes, new restaurants and meeting new people. And I'll bring that to a close and I'll say, okay, now please can you introduce yourself? And typically they'll do something very similar. It will only take about sort of 2 or 3 minutes. But as they're going through it, I'll listen very carefully. And anything that piques my interest, I'll sort of have that in the back of my mind. So they'll tell me their name, their age, where they're from, hopefully a little bit about their school and career up to now, and then a little bit about their passions, their hobbies, and their interests, and I'll be listening very carefully to that part especially. And once they've finished, I'll thank them, obviously, and I'll say, okay, I'd like to ask you a few more questions about what you've just told me. So I'll go back, and if they've told me something interesting about their hometown, I'll ask a little bit more about that. If they've told me something about university and they look quite interested in the course that they took, I'll say, can you tell me a little bit about what you studied, what you learned, what were the most interesting things? And then I'll ask them about the jobs in their career, about each different job, what their responsibilities were, what they learned. But then of course, when it comes to the part about passions, hobbies and interests, I'm gonna ask as much as I can. I'm going to imagine I don't know anything about these things, and I want them to paint me an entire picture about what it is that they love. It's often sort of one thing. It might be family, so I'll ask them to tell me all about their family, their kids, or it could be something like a creative pursuit, like they could be an actor, so I'll ask them all about their career, their favourite roles, their least favourite roles, and why they love it so much. Because then in future lessons, I've got something I can go to every time, because people never get bored of talking about what they love. You know, people want to talk about what they love. I know in an English lesson you're trying to help them improve their language, but the whole reason someone learns a language, I think, is so that they can express themselves, so that they can communicate with more people, and people want to express themselves about things that they love. So I try to give them as much practice as I can with that. And the thing is, when you get them to talk about that the most, they're often going to stop here and there with like, oh, what's the word? I don't know the word for if I'm an actor, and before I get a part, I have to go to some kind of meeting. You mean a casting or an audition? Yes, casting, audition. And I'll write that down, and at the end of the lesson, I'll check that with them. And in future lessons, I'll continue checking that with them. So that's what I mean about trying to focus on a key hobby, passion or interest in that first lesson, because they'll light up, they'll start to relax, because we also feel comfortable when we're talking about things we love. And that will be the key focus of my first lesson, to find out what it is that makes that student tick. 9 times out of 10, your student will talk until the cows come home about this thing. So if you're lucky, that's what will happen in your first lesson. I have to say, it happens in 95% of mine. In every conversation lesson I have, I want my student to be talking for 95% of the lesson, because it's their 60 minutes or 90 minutes in 1 week normally where they get to practice speaking. Grammar you can set for homework, listening you can set for homework, but I just feel that it's crucial for them to have that time to speak and to express themselves. For the first 50 minutes or so of the lesson, it should roughly follow that plan. Introducing yourself, your student introducing themselves, then you going back through what they've told you, and then really focusing on that key thing that really, makes the blood pump in their veins, that makes them get out of bed every morning. So that's it for the first 50 minutes or so. For the final 10 minutes, I will present a little file that I have bought. On the front, there will be a cover page with my student's name. When you open it, there'll be 2 sections of photocopies, and these will be typically 1 section of grammar exercises and 1 section of everyday vocabulary exercises. The grammar exercises will be on a topic ideally I will have organised or agreed with the student beforehand. So before the first lesson, I will ask via email, what grammar points do you really want to focus on? And typically it's things like past tenses, present perfect, articles, prepositions, conditionals, future tense, things like that. So I'll have a photocopy section of grammar, and I'll have a photocopy section of vocabulary. And this will be about the vocabulary will be 10 different pages on everyday English vocabulary. So there'll be 1 page on sport, 1 page on cinema, 1 page on shopping, 1 page on music, and they're just simple, easy exercises. And I will say in this last 10 minutes that every week I want them to do 2 pages of grammar for homework and 1 page of vocabulary for homework. The next week, when they arrive at that first lesson, or the second lesson, sorry, I will review the vocabulary that I've been noting down during the lesson first. Then we will go through the grammar that they've done for homework. Often I will take the exercise that they've done from them and give them my tablet or the book themselves, so they have to do it again in the lesson for extra practice. Then we'll go through the 1 page of vocabulary from the folder, and then after that it's off into speaking. If there's time, and sometimes conversation does run dry, your student might have a hangover or just not be quite in the mood or have other things on their mind, then often for the last 15 minutes I'll have a video to watch, and that's often going to be a TED talk. So that is basically how my first lesson runs. So at the end I will have an attendance sheet with their name, with the date, with the time and the price, and a room and then a box for them to sign. An attendance sheet looks professional. I know lots of private teachers that don't bother with this, but I think it's a good habit to get into because it's just a professional thing to do. And the last thing I'll do, little tip, is I'll say, I hope that lesson was okay. If there's ever at any point you want to change the format of the lesson, please let me know, because that's why I'm here. And then I'll say, and by the way, I'm always looking for new private students. So if you recommend me to another student who starts regular lessons, you will get a free lesson. And I have to say that technique has worked wonders for me. That's one of the biggest reasons how I filled my schedule with private students. One more thing I'll also mention, I will make it absolutely clear about the 24-hour cancellation policy. I recommend that any English teacher in any situation, whether it's a private student or for a language school that normally have this policy anyway, that your student must cancel the lesson 24 hours before the start of the lesson, or they will be charged for that lesson. You explain clearly this is because otherwise there's not enough time basically for you to find another student to take that time. And 100% of the time, in my experience, my students said to me, yep, that's absolutely fine, I totally respect that. So it's very important to make that clear from the beginning. And like I say, even though that might seem a bit official and a bit dictatorial, you can soften that blow by saying, but by the way, if you recommend a new student for me, you get a free lesson. So just to summarise, my typical first lesson with a new student involves me arriving on time, dressed smartly, greeting my student with a nice smile and lots of eye contact, and explaining in slow, careful English that today will just be about getting to know each other with lots of speaking practice, and that I'll be giving them some lesson information at the end of the lesson. First, I will introduce myself and tell them a little bit about me, then I'll ask my student to do the same, then I will go through the information they've just given me, asking for more information about all the different things they've said, and then at the end I'll particularly focus on one particular passion, hobby or interest that they have told me about, and I will get as much information about that as I can so that in future lessons I can continue talking about it and hopefully give them as much vocabulary related to their particular interest as possible. For the last 10 minutes of the lesson, I will explain about the folder with the grammar and the vocabulary homeworks that I will ask them to do, and then I will review any of the vocabulary or pronunciation that we've picked up through that first lesson in a kind of little test for fun at the end. And then finally, I will explain clearly about my cancellation policy, and also about the incentive for them that if they recommend a new friend, that they will get one free lesson. So that's just my first lesson. What's your typical first lesson? It would be great to hear from you and to see your ideas and tips in the comments below to help other teachers that are approaching maybe their first ever lesson with a new student. So please do comment below. So thanks very much for watching. If your first ever lesson is approaching, don't forget to check out my video on how to deal with the terror of teaching your first ever lesson. There's a link to that in the description. If you did find this video useful, please click like, share it with anyone you think might find it useful, and don't forget to subscribe. There are new videos every week on international relocation advice, ESL teaching advice, and lots more. So until next time, toot toot.